Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Christian Horner has responded to the major concerns of Zak Brown that he's revealed over the last few days about the increasing closeness of the relationship between Red Bull and their sister team. Zak Brown says it's a serious problem. The FIA need to solve it ASAP. Christian Horner says, no issues here. It's a similar relationship to what's been the case with Mercedes and Williams, among others, for many years at all. Which side of this argument do you fall on? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for 35,000 subs as well. Now, first of all, of course, this was doing the rounds on social media today. Link up here at the ski slopes between George Russell and Seb Vettel. So this is always nice to see. Like, whenever I see a Formula 1 driver at a ski slope after, of course, what we all know happened to Michael Schumacher, I always get a little bit concerned. But there's always talk about, should the drivers be doing, of course, Vettel's now retired, but should the drivers be doing what could be dangerous activities shortly before the season begins? We know that last year, Lance Stroll broke his wrist or whatever, falling off a bike or whatever it was. And it usually happens that some drivers get injured in some way. Even here's Charles Leclerc not long ago, also at the slopes. So, look, some drivers will not decide to do this. Some drivers will want to do so, and their teams will not really be able to stop them. And I guess different teams differ in the way they kind of think about this, because Max Verstappen actually said that footballers often have it in their contract they're not allowed to ski, and it's the same for me, no dangerous sports. So Max says that per his contract, he's not allowed to do any what would be considered dangerous sports. Now, every sport could potentially be dangerous in some way, depending on how you do it. Some are more dangerous than others. Whether Max has like a list of things he's not allowed to do, I don't know. But there's Max with that in his contract, and then there's Lewis Hamilton jumping out of a plane every other week when he goes skydiving or surfing or, you know, whatever these guys like to do. Now, obviously, Toto Wolff is not going to stop Hamilton jumping out of a plane and going skydiving. That's just the relationship they have. And therefore, I suppose that if you're George Russell and you see Hamilton obviously has this relationship where he's not going to get told what he can or cannot do, then I guess Toto can't really say to George, all right, you're not allowed to do so either. So I guess that's just how it's going to be. And some drivers respect and realize that, okay, maybe I shouldn't, but some drivers obviously want to enjoy their time off, and, you know, if it helps them regenerate for the new season, obviously that's a good idea, but obviously it can also cause potential issues as well. So they've got to manage that degree of risk, as other athletes do as well. Max Verstappen, though, would prefer not to go skiing and instead race virtual racing cars, which is just what he always does. And yesterday was the 24 hours of Daytona virtually on, I think it was just iRacing, and Verstappen, of course, wins with these other gentlemen. The funny thing about this is as well that they were driving a Mercedes. You guys can actually see here, this was the red line car. Of course, it's all virtual, but you see on the left-hand side, I believe they almost had like a collision, or they did have a collision with their own sister car in the race, but they ended up winning the class regardless. So yeah, it's kind of funny to see Max drive a Mercedes AMG, which is interesting because when Max was trying, I think, a couple of WEC cars a couple of months ago, he was in an Audi, I think he was in a Porsche possibly as well. So we see him drive a few other things that aren't necessarily a Red Bull, but then when he comes to the Formula 1 track, he's obviously decked out in Red Bull gear, and that is massively the plan. Speaking of Audi, I will just say this. So Carlos Sainz Sr., we saw him won the Dakar Rally for the 4th time at the age of 61 just the other day, and his son, Carlos Sainz Jr., currently a Ferrari driver. We believe that Sainz Jr. has fallen somewhat out of favour with Ferrari in recent times, at least in terms of the current contract negotiations. Rumours the other day were going around that Sainz's contract negotiations have ground to a halt, and that they're really focused on getting Leclerc's contract locked in, and after that, if they get Sainz again or if they don't, they have other options. They have maybe Albon on the market, they have potentially Gasly available as well. Those were the rumours. So it's very plausible that Sainz does not continue with Ferrari past this upcoming year, which I think at this point is maybe a 50-50 situation. Then Sainz Sr., we know his relationship for a long time with Audi, says, well, he discusses the project and says, I know how seriously they take every project, kind of implying that obviously he drives for Audi, so it makes sense. But saying, look, Audi, good relationship over there. I'm sure that Audi, the new Formula 1 team, would, as a result of this, consider getting Sainz Jr. into their lineup. This makes things maybe somewhat more challenging for the likes of Zhou Guanyu and, of course, Valtteri Bottas over the next couple of years. Audi will also most likely want a German driver as well, whether that's Hülkenberg, Could that be Mick Schumacher? Could they try and get Vettel out of retirement? These are some options that have been floating around. But come 2026, a pairing of like Sainz and Hülkenberg or something like that wouldn't be out of the complete realms of possibility for that Audi outfit, I don't believe. But of course, quite a few things have to happen and develop to get there. And also, if Sainz's deal with Ferrari does end at the end of the upcoming season, so he has no drive at Ferrari in 2025, does he go to Audi or what it will be stake F1 team for 1 year before they officially become Audi? Because I'm not exactly surprised, but I thought Audi might have already taken over the team to some degree. They already own like 50% of Sauber. I think next year they're going to be owning 75%, and by the time 2026 comes around, they'll own basically the entire team. But, you know, maybe I'm a bit surprised that it's just going to be stake F1 team under Sauber for the next couple of years, and there isn't maybe more Audi investment than there could be, but also it puts Sainz in maybe a bit of a limbo situation if they're not Audi yet, but yet that's definitely a possibility for 2026. But let's talk about this whole AlphaTauri stuff. I think that I heard the race talk about them the other day as the team formerly known as AlphaTauri, which might be what I have to go for just because we talked the other day, Visa, Cash App, RB. I don't want to get into it again. But Simone Resta, formerly Ferrari, but very recently actually of Haas, not sure why that wasn't mentioned here in this tweet, but whatever, he left Haas just the other day, we believe, after maybe disagreements behind the scenes, maybe not, we don't fully know. But Simone Resta was Haas's technical director or whatever for a little bit of time. He's now gone, and rumour has it that he might be in the crosshairs of Red Bull to go to the team formerly known as AlphaTauri. So that might be a possibility, but over the last few days we have seen lots of criticism over this relationship, and more so now than we really have ever seen before. I think, as I said before, especially over the cost cap era, the limited developmental resources the teams have, there are concerns, maybe for understandable reasons, that with AlphaTauri or whatever and Red Bull coming closer together in the facilities at Milton Keynes, there's potential crossover information. The teams obviously aren't allowed to share technical data. They aren't allowed to share wind tunnel testing time either, of course, but there maybe has been some concerns from teams that can this be properly policed? McLaren would prefer this relationship simply ceases to exist. And Red Bull are no longer allowed to own two teams in the first place. In regular sports, this wouldn't be the case. He says for the health of the sport, for the fairness of the sport, this is a serious problem that needs to be tackled now, and must therefore be resolved. Now, you can argue exactly where this is coming from and why this is so much of an issue now and it hasn't been in the past, but especially when, given the dominance of Red Bull last year and the fact that AlphaTauri are going to take basically as much as they can from that RB19 and from whatever Red Bull are currently working on, next year's sister car is going to be very strong. There's absolutely no doubt about it as far as many of the teams are concerned, and understandably, if you're a McLaren, if you're one of those teams in, the upper midfield trying to break in to get consistent podiums and maybe even compete for the championship, you don't want to have to worry about, the sister team of the dominant force in the sport. Piastri says we're learning how to compete at the very front again. That's exciting. But if you're in that kind of mid-pack, upper mid-pack situation, you don't want to have to worry about the team formerly known as AlphaTauri making an absolute charge through the field with basically an RB19 clone next season. Now, Mercedes have said, no big deal. The rules say there's no problems here and we shouldn't be too concerned about it because there are very tight rules regarding team cooperation. They can't share more information than they are allowed to in terms of parts. Sure, if they sell parts, they have to probably send a document to say, okay, this is what the part does, this is what it looks like, that type of stuff. They can't share any other type of information between the two teams. Mercedes and James Allison said, well, maybe don't worry about it too much because the rules say that it's absolutely fine. But Zak Brown clearly disagrees. He wants it dealt with, and probably the other teams agree as well, because why wouldn't they, right? Why would you not? If you have the option to put like a vote in to shut down AlphaTauri or get them to be forcibly sold, maybe they would decide to do that, unless they think that the current setup meant that the sister team is less competitive, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So all of a sudden the sister team looks like it's going to be more competitive again, as it was a few years ago, and there's now restrictions on testing time and these type of things that maybe there could be some risk of a crossover if there was any collusion going on, which Zak Brown hasn't said that there is, but he's just kind of said that there is the potential for it, so let's just stop it right now. And even Peter Bayer says, new CEO of AlphaTauri, that the shareholders, when they were resharpening things, also said, we want you guys to be competitive. So that's why they're doing so much more sharing. So Christian Horner, of course, as he does, has weighed in on this. We know that Horner and Brown had a fair bit of a square off, really, when the whole budget cap breach thing was going on, when they breached the cost cap in 2021. It came out in late 2020. 2022, and Zak Brown basically wrote a letter saying that they cheated. And Horner was not happy with that use of terminology because, as far as he was concerned, okay, we breached the cap, but it wasn't intentional. Cheating, of course, implies some degree of intent. Zak Brown said they cheated. Horner wasn't happy about it. They had a bit of a spat at the time, and well, that's now calmed down, of course. But we're back at it again with the Horner versus Zak Brown stuff. So Horner says that there's no problem with this. Of course he would. I mean, he's not going to say, yeah, actually, he's got a fair point there, Mr. Zak Brown. Like, maybe we should have to sell our team. AlphaTauri is owned by the same shareholders as Red Bull Racing, but of course, the way they operate is independent from Red Bull Racing. They take benefit of the parts they are allowed to be transferred, like the gearbox, the suspension, and so on. And apparently that's going to be basically everything that is allowed, which is not as much as they have previously taken. Haas from Ferrari take pretty much everything. AlphaTauri haven't done from Red Bull really, but next season they will, in the same way that Williams and Aston Martin have done so with Mercedes or Haas with Ferrari, which is true. That's a relationship which is allowed. You're allowed to sell engines, customer teams exist, but the relationship between those two parties is not quite the same as it has been with, AlphaTauri and Red Bull, because those companies aren't owned by the same shareholders necessarily, although does Toto Wolff still have a stake in Aston Martin? So, there's always some kind of cross-pollination in some ways, but it's not ever been quite the same way as we have seen with the Red Bull Racing and the sister team. So, that's Horner's perspective, that it's no big deal because it's basically the same as either other cars have done. But of course, that's not really addressing the key point of concern that Zak Brown made, which is it's also a potential sporting issue. We've seen examples before. I mentioned the other day, like in Qatar 2021, when Pierre Gasly, decided not to open the DRS to allow Max through, and maybe Tsunoda fighting Hamilton very hard. Was it Istanbul that year? Whatever it was, there was a few examples of things that you might not have necessarily expected to see elsewhere, and you might not necessarily see a Williams driver do for a Mercedes driver, although we have seen examples of that in the past potentially. So from a sporting perspective, from a technical perspective, it's obviously, a big talking point at the moment. Christian Horner's clapped back and said that it's no big deal. It's the same thing as Mercedes and Williams, for example, have going on. But I'm sure that Zak Brown and probably Mercedes themselves see it rather differently. Whether there's going to be any actual real change over the next couple of years as a result of this, I wouldn't be massively surprised if come 2026 something is forced to change. But also that makes things really interesting in terms of, okay, what happens to the Red Bull Powertrains project if they are forced to sell AlphaTauri to a new ownership group? Then do they sell their engines there as well? Is that brand new ownership group going to have a very different idea? Could that ownership group be Andretti if they don't get allowed in and Haas don't want to sell? I guess there's lots of options here, but also that would harm Red Bull because they obviously do gain some benefit from being able to offer 4 seats on the grid basically, and test out some drivers to see who they want to put in their main team. So Zak Brown has actually come out and also said that he would like a more closely unified relationship between Formula One themselves, the Formula One management, Liberty Media, shall we say, and the FIA. We know that there's been lots of, contradictions between those two parties, especially with regard to Toto Wolff over the last few weeks, that drama with the FIA investigation that went down, and Zak Brown says that ideally they would be more unified and more aligned on things, but if anything, that feels less and less likely to be happening now, especially with the leadership of, Mohammed Ben Sulayem being called massively into question, and also a closer relationship there might give more confidence in the teams and also in the fans that they can properly manage the FIA, these type of potential conflict of interest. I'm not sure that the fan base right now and even the teams have a massive amount of confidence that the FIA can properly govern these concerns we have discussed in the same way that the cost cap over the last couple of years. Is there like a massive amount of faith, especially in 2021-22, that they successfully, managed that their auditors did the correct job, that the accountants of the teams didn't get one over on the auditors in some respect with the whole catering thing that Red Bull managed to pull back in 2021? I'm not sure there is right now necessarily. So I think Zak Brown makes a fair point. Of course, Horner's going to say what he's going to say. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comment section below. Just one final thing to close up with, thought was interesting here from Williams. They finished, 7th, didn't they, in last year's championship. They just pipped AlphaTauri, I'm pretty sure, to that 7th position. Then it was, of course, Sauber in P9 and then Haas in P10 last year. Williams are trying to make big progress. I do wonder what the future is going to be for James Vowles, just because there have been rumours around a potential move for him back to Mercedes if Toto Wolff was ever going to step away from that TP role, but he's signed himself another 3-year extension, so that does not seem like it's going to occur anytime soon. But actually, he says that really where they are 7th right now, Williams, is where they will probably try and maintain. He actually mentioned that it's not realistic for them to fight Alpine and Aston Martin. The development of rate of those guys and also the respective performance of the cars cars means that Williams have a hard time fighting further forward than they are. I think really for Williams, it's more of a long-term thing. It's looking at their CapEx, capital expenditure trajectories, the investment from Doralton, getting the resources in, trying to get back in the long term. But the way they see it, the way Val sees it, it's more about looking behind and trying to keep those other teams behind them next year, even though the team formerly known as AlphaTauri might make good progress. But it's not so much about looking forward to Alpine and Aston Martin, who should still be on paper the stronger teams for now. Williams will probably still build a strong car in a straight line, and there also are rumours that Mercedes' power unit is, gaining steam, shall we say, for next season, which might be especially advantageous to a team with pretty good performance in a straight line. And we'll get to see some of the data on this at Bahrain testing next month. We're going to see all of the car launches in the relatively near future, which is massively exciting, of course, but really what matters is when they turn up to the track. People love talking about the liveries. People love talking about, all this element to the car. They've done this with it. They've done that with it. That's a cool idea. That's a cool idea. And sure, there's lots of cool ideas when you make these cars. Whether they work in reality is, of course, another question entirely. And we are basically 1 month away from when we're going to really start to see who's got the strong packages when we turn up to Bahrain for testing in pretty much a month's time. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.